welcome to Biztech's Community Conversation Show. Our guest for today is Louise Pulford. She's Chief Executive Officer, Social Innovation Exchange. Now, or it's also known as SIX. SIX believes in the transformative power of collaboration. And to tell us more about SIX, Louise, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here.
Now, Louise, for a start, could you give us an overview of Social Innovation Exchange and its whole reason for it being founded?
Sure. I mean, let's start with social innovation, shall we? Because somehow the minute you put social in front of the word innovation, which is very well understood in terms of business, in terms of science, technology, even the military, the minute you add the word social, people feel a little confused. And it really isn't that complicated. It's applying innovation methods, tools, processes to solving our societal challenges, because we really need to innovate around society. And not to start this interview on a really negative note, but we are failing. If we were not failing, we would have more vibrant democracies, better welfare systems. We would be able to deal with migration differently. We would not be thinking that AI and tech is going to kill us all in the next 5 years. We'd be able to deal with pandemics, our aging societies. We are not well prepared to deal with societal challenges because all of our systems are outdated. And so we need innovation, and we need to apply the same rigor that we do when we're trying to find a cure to cancer, or we're trying to develop the best new vacuum cleaner, to the way we're trying to deal with our healthcare systems, reinvent our schools, think differently about how we live together. And so why we exist is to encourage that kind of innovation.
Okay, fantastic. Now, you've got 3 pillars, right? Cross-sector, global, exchange. Break it down for us and tell us how this works.
Okay, so let's start with cross-sector, shall we? Basically, we do not believe that it's the responsibility of NGOs or social sector organizations to solve societal challenges. We need the best minds from everywhere. Business has a whole role to play in the way that we solve societal challenges. And we know this from things like ESG. This is not just a nice label that people should be using. This is to say, businesses, you have a role to play in the communities around you, in your customers, in your future workforces. So let's bring the best minds from universities. Let's bring that research out to make it useful for people, not just to be in ivory towers talking to other academics. Let's bring everyone together. Philanthropy, impact investing. We don't operate in isolation as companies or organizations. So it's very strange that when we come together, everyone only talks to people who are very similar to them. So cross-sector, very important. Global, everyone should realize things like the thing that we've just all been through, are coming out of the big pandemic, COVID-19, is just such a good example of why global collaboration is important and why looking beyond your own borders is really important. The vaccine would never have been created. There would have been many more deaths if we hadn't cooperated globally, if we hadn't worked together to understand what was happening in different places, to, again, work across sectors, to develop these vaccines using universities and companies, thinking about distribution in different ways. It's so simple. Climate change as well. We know that what happens in Germany or the UK affects everyone in Bangladesh or India or Colombia. Yet everyone is putting up borders. There's a very isolationist government policy happening in many, many places. We're nationalists, we're protectionists, we're inward looking. So there's an irony that we know the biggest challenge is we need global cooperation. We need to learn from people who are different from us. And there's an irony in the way that many governments are behaving. So one of the things that we're trying to do is promote this global learning.
I want to interrupt you here because our audience is a very business-centric audience. And what I have to stress is this: getting involved in social innovation doesn't have to be a cost. There's
Oh,
actually
no.
a key benefit for businesses to be involved in this, and key benefits not only from a status, but also in their bottom line.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've done a lot of work, and we continue to do a lot of work with businesses to help them understand that, because actually it will make you more successful. You will be drained as businesses if you are not prepared for a future workforce who have a different kind of moral compass these days. Young people care about these things because, after all, it was young people from the recent pandemic that came off the worst in the world. And I think, just to come on to exchange as a value for us, we were called exchange, not network, because networks tend to be very transactional.
Okay.
I turn up, you give me something, I take it from you. Exchange has more of a value add for everyone, coming to the point that you just made. And, we can't fix the world alone, full stop. We believe in the power of exchange for good. We want to speed up that collaboration and help people, companies in Asia, learn from companies in other parts of the world, because they're global institutions, and we're not seeing enough global connection between these organizations.
Okay, Louise, when I did research about your company, you've really you have a global reach, but you've also done some interesting projects in Asia Pacific region, and I see quite a number in South Korea. Maybe you can share with us some key examples of some success stories of what you've been able to do in Asia.
Yeah, sure. So of course, different parts of Asia is very, very different. Let's talk about South Korea for a moment. We worked with the South Korean government for over a decade, and particularly with the mayor, helping them develop a social innovation strategy for the city. That means helping them do participatory budgeting, helping them work with a series of global advisors who are experts in housing, in labs, in philanthropy, in innovating in government processes from all over the world. And we help bring them together to provide advice for the mayor on his activities. We hosted festivals there to connect, for example, the very booming tech sector with society, because one of the things we see is technology is not, and we see this from we're all going to die from AI in the next few years. There's a misunderstanding between how the technology sector works and the rest of the world, the rest of society. So we did festivals to bring those things together. And over a decade, when you work with people on a longer term footing, you can really impact at every level, from society to philanthropy to government and beyond. So that was a great example. We've done a lot of work in Hong Kong, for example, social labs model. This is a model actually that came from the Netherlands. It was very, very well developed. It's about getting people involved in their local communities, coming together and co-creating, designing solutions to deal with challenges. Someone at one of our events in Hong Kong, happens to be one of our board members, was very inspired by this model, and they worked very, very closely to embed this social labs model in Hong Kong, which have been running successfully with young people for the last 6 years. So there's a bunch of examples like that. We've also done quite a lot of mapping, looking at the role of philanthropy, particularly in Southeast Asia, to influence the business for good movement. So I think philanthropy, one of our key messages at the moment, is not just money. Philanthropy is a tiny portion of GDP. They don't actually have that many philanthropic dollars to do things with. So if you can use philanthropy as an influencer, philanthropy can shape agendas, help governments think differently about it. I think philanthropy has a really interesting role in businesses, in particular in Southeast Asia, as businesses are trying to deal with ESG requirements and all of those things.
Okay, so I want to drill in on that a little bit more in terms of philanthropy. So for me, the gold standard that really started the whole philanthropic movement being more accountable was really the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation decades ago, when they started putting KPIs in the NGOs who were receiving grants from them. How do you see this now with the whole NGO philanthropic movement being a lot more accountable for the philanthropic dollars? How do you see this landscape panning out in Southeast Asia?
First point I think is important to say is the Southeast Asia and actually Asia generally is leading in this work. And I think there is a real misconception that innovation in philanthropy, innovation generally, but in particular in philanthropy, is a net export from the US or from Europe to Asia. Absolutely incorrect. And that's something that Europe and North America really need to realize very quickly. And you have organizations like Yayasan Hasana, who are hosting this forum, as, by the way, a very good collaboration with AVPN. And this is a really good example of how two big influential institutions from an ecosystem standpoint, but also from a national standpoint, can come together to do things. But I think one of the things we're seeing we saw in Southeast Asia that's leading is more collaborative funding, more pooled funding.
And so this is private sector, public sector, collaborative funding. Is that what you're referring
absolutely,
to? Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, one of the things that Yayasan Hasana has done, which I think is really interesting, and I think a really good model for the region, is working very, very closely with the government to help the government distribute funds in a more innovative way. Because philanthropy can be a very good conduit between government and civil society. They have relationships with both. They know how to talk to government and they know how to talk to civil society. And what philanthropy has, but doesn't use enough, in our opinion, is a flexibility and freedom that public money cannot afford, because it's public and they have all the bureaucratic regulations that they need behind it. So philanthropy being a conduit between the two, and we saw many examples in Southeast Asia of that kind of role, being able to talk both languages.
And so here's the interesting thing, because Yayasan Hasana, among other things, focuses on key things like education, healthcare, in terms of social innovation and collaboration, and rope in, as you pointed out, other stakeholders besides the government, civil society as well, and also other donors from other foundations. And I think that model sometimes, because in Southeast Asia, as you pointed out just a few minutes ago, sometimes in Southeast Asia, we don't realize it, that we're actually pushing the envelope rather than taking a Western model.
Exactly. And I think that's something that the whole world needs to realize. I mean, I think there's a very different way of thinking about philanthropy in Africa, across the African continent as well, across Latin America. And I think, all of our work is about context is king. And you need to understand the context that you're working in to understand how the institutions are designed and where the money is coming from. But there is different kinds of money and new kinds of money, new kinds of funds, new kinds of individuals, more private donors as well in Southeast Asia, and I think in the African continent that we have in Europe, for example. And I think it's really important to understand that dynamic is different, and actually inherently, I think, therefore, much more innovative. And I think I believe in Southeast Asia that philanthropy and companies are much closer, and I think they work in a different way, sometimes two sides of the same coin. It's a much more integrated relationship. Again, something that Europe and the US need to learn from.
Now, next week, we're having this conference that you're attending in Malaysia this coming week. What are some of the key things you're looking out for as key takeaways from the conference, besides you being a speaker?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm completely honored to chair a fantastic cross-sector panel talking about leadership. Because I think, and again, the leadership in the sector is and the leadership in Asia is something that we need to communicate in other parts of the world too. I have someone, have philanthropy, a university, a private sector, and of course, the wonderful Shahira from Yayasan Hassana on my panel. We'll be having a conversation about what leadership looks like in those different kind of sectors. But one of the things I do want to make sure, or I do want to understand at the event next week, is where the conversations are in terms of the impacts that people are trying to have with this work around, I don't know, climate or young people, around mental health, around how we are thinking about technology and its impact on society. But also I'm interested in the kind of methodologies that people are using. Are we really looking to the future enough? I think there's something about the use of strategic foresight that we use a lot and as a tool in many of our programs and projects.
And could you break down what is strategic foresight?
Really? Yeah, sure, absolutely. Well, it's very interesting, actually. Method developed by Shell, and much more used in the private sector than is in the public sector, and certainly not really very much in philanthropy. But it's about being able to look ahead and prepare for the challenges of the future, being much more future focused. Philanthropy is a good example of this. Spends more time acting as a band-aid of the problems that we see today, rather than looking at the root causes. So strategic foresight as a method, or futures thinking, lots of different words for it and slightly different processes, is about thinking about where we're going to be in 50 years and how do we start designing funds and organizations that are prepared for where we might be going, or at least to be flexible to think about the different ways of where we might be going, compared to just organizing things around the problems that we see today. So the healthcare problems or the education problems we see today have a much deeper root cause than I think many people design for.
And I'm looking forward to attending the conference as well. But
yes,
this has been a fascinating conversation, and I've learned a lot. But Louise, before you leave, any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I guess two, if you will. The first one links actually to my last point, is around the positivity. It's very easy at the moment to be less so in Asia, I think. Actually, I always feel very positive when I come from Asia, but in many parts of the world, it sometimes feels like we're not doing well. And we think we need more imagination in this world, a new way of thinking. We can easily picture ecological disasters or a future ruled by robots. This is where all of our dystopian films come from. But it's very difficult to imagine a world in which people are thriving and we have incredible democracies and we've removed poverty and businesses are good. And we all like working with governments. It's very difficult to imagine that kind of world. And we believe the first step in making any kind of change is for us to shift our thinking and think about the world going forward. And that links to my second point, is that I think events like the collaboration between AVPN and Yayasan Hassana and the Hassana Forum are really good ways of bringing people together and showing and demonstrating a different way of being together, a different role that businesses can play in society, if they have models that they can follow and do differently, a different role from philanthropy, different ways of collaborating. And so I urge everyone to come with that kind of mindset and be really creative in the way they could think about, another world which could be possible.
Louise, on that note, thank you very much for your insights. Thanks for coming on the show.
It was such a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, I'm Brian Fernandez, and we've been speaking to Louise Pulford. She's the CEO of Social Innovation Exchange on Biztech's Community Conversation Show. This interview will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.